That's right my friends, it's Xuan Yuan 7. You have to give props to a game that doesn't care whether or not you can pronounce their name. I'm a BBC and even I don't know if I'm saying it properly. BBC is used as a categorization for Chinese people born in Britain, hence British born Chinese. This acronym is still commonly used today alongside the well-known term referring to a big black. I never heard about this game either until I bought it, and the first time I came across Xuan Yuan 7 was in a recent PSN sale. After laughing at the audacity of them to make 7 of these games, I did some googling and found that the series started in 1990 and it's gotten to number 7 because they're actually quite popular over in Asia. There must be a reason for that, innit? I mean, we weren't wrong about rice, were we?
How could a billion Chinese people be wrong?
And any franchise that hits 7 entries must be good. So after waiting a full excruciating day for the game to be delivered via Amazon Prime, how did I get along with it? Xuan Yuan 7 is an action role-playing game by a Taiwanese developer called Domo Studios. The combat, which plays out in real time, is a combination of light attacks, heavy attacks, and special abilities that are on cooldown. Heavy attacks can be enhanced, and the effects changed by equipping different forms. And that's a good thing because heavy attacks are the most useful tool available and should be spammed constantly. There are good cooldown abilities, but the cooldowns take so long that you only use them once per fight. Maximum twice on a boss fight. There's also an ultimate ability that allows you to slow down time, but it's implemented poorly, so you can't do much damage after you use it, and the cooldown on it is ridiculous. The combat system isn't terrible to play with, but it definitely feels dated and a bit clunky compared to modern standards. You're dropped right into the center of the universe, and it feels like you're dropped the same way into the mechanics of the game. They do give you a brief explanation of things, but you're mostly going to explore the menus to figure out how the crafting system works with everything else. And it's not something players should ignore because it's essential for powering up and tweaking the builds to synergize with the rest of the party. Dungeons are big, but mostly feel like corridors with battles peppered around. There are some simple platforming bits, but the dungeons and the game overall feels flat. Not as flat as something like Scarlet Nexus, but definitely not as vertical as Elden Ring. When I say flat, I'm not talking about how many floors a dungeon might have, but how the player interacts with the environment, how they might be required to engage and navigate it beyond just pushing the stick in the right direction. There's a quick travel system, but it's not very well thought out. The travel points are deliberately positioned to force the player to walk through its locations more often, usually a bit of a distance away from where you want to be. And sometimes it's outright quicker to just run from one town to the next because the NPC you want to speak to is in between the 2 quick travel points. The problem is that after you've been through these interconnecting areas, cleared the side quests which are interesting and all worth doing, and found the hidden treasure chests, there's no other reason for you to revisit those areas, especially since the locations aren't tremendously interesting to begin with. It's easy to plat the game. I don't know the term for Xbox players, but basically, if you want all the achievements, it's not very challenging to get them, and the game isn't a long one by RPG standards. So if there's anything you really hate about the gameplay, well, at least it doesn't overstay its welcome. I played it on normal mode and that provides an adequate level of challenge, especially on boss fights. Hard mode is a lot less forgiving and will force you to think about your health and build synergy with the party more carefully. Now, I'm a big fan of the JRPG genre, and I have been since I was a young child, but being honest, some of the writing and exposition can be extremely poor. I personally value dialogue that is believable. Otherwise it really stands out to me. There are ways to present characters and plot with nuance and depth through the dialogue, but this can be hit or miss with JRPGs, especially with the modern stuff in my opinion. Xuan Yuan 7 is a Taiwanese game, and it's evident that their approach did not go the way of many JRPGs. It's not perfect, and there are a couple of points where I felt that they didn't integrate some of the character motivations very smoothly. But for the most part, dialogue was not annoying. It was enjoyable in fact, and the banter between main characters felt especially natural and believable. The story overall does start off well, especially during the first act where all the pieces are set into place. By the end of the second act, things start to feel a bit rushed, and I got the sense that whole chunks of the third act were completely cut out. There's political intrigue, war, rebellion, and mystic mysteries to get involved in, but if you get lost in all of that or the pacing completely crumbles away, the simple thread driving the story is of Zhao trying to rescue his sister. It's a bit like the God of War approach where even if everything else in the story goes over your head, you can always fall back to Kratos and Boy's simple mission to scatter the ashes of the deceased. Zhao's mission to save his sister is also simple to understand and easily relatable. There's a prologue after the last boss that you have to piece together by backtracking through previous locations to view some cutscenes involving one of the important side characters. It's supposed to trigger an emotional response like, "Oh, I remember this bit," and such good times we had. But instead it ends up a bit annoying because the backtracking part just isn't fun. It feels disjointed, and it's aimed more towards series fans who played a few of the previous titles because they will recognise the references and the characters involved. Ultimately, I feel like the failings of the story and pacing come down to this anchor that the devs were carrying throughout most of the game. They were too concerned with linking Xuan Yuan 7 to previous installments, and the time they spent fleshing out this side character's past could have been focused on developing the present timeline and growth of the main characters, who we've been getting to know for the first 2 acts. In the end, I felt a bit alienated, as though my experience as someone new to the series is being sidelined for fans of the older titles. Final Fantasy has shown that it's possible to make more than 16 games in their series, with each installment welcoming new players and old fans equally. Maybe that's not the goal of Xuan Yuan 7, and I'm not saying it should be, but if the sequels make it over to the West again, they really need to start considering their new audience equally, in my opinion. So the dialogue is good, and the story is a mixed bag. What about the translation? It feels like there are tiers of translation quality here. So the dialogue, subtitles and game journals had the most attention and are all around pretty good and full of character and personality. Most of the translation budget was spent in these areas. The quality drops when it moves onto some of the item descriptions and NPC chatter. This is where most of the grammar and spelling issues occur, and it's clear that these parts are not translated by a fluent English speaker. The game has a bit of trouble deciding whether or not it's going to play it straightforward or add accented flares to the text in these bits. I saw some NPC text that read like a Cockney accent, and on the other hand was a character teaching me how to play chess with Grandmaster style intonations. "Ah, you must now do this for victory. This move, known as capture the eagle." I exaggerate a bit, but there is clearly an inconsistency to the text. Look at the sudden aggression with this lady referring to her child. The inconsistencies carry over to names. Maybe I'm not understanding how the Chinese language works. I know, I failed as an Asian. But take a look at just 2 examples. The main character in journals is called Taishi Zhao, but is referred to by others and himself as Li Sishu. A character called Liu Shan is also referred to as General Bo Sheng. How are you supposed to follow all this? Even the name of the game is referred to as Xuan Yuan 7 on the intro screen, and Xuan Yuan Sword 7 everywhere else. Translations were outsourced to native speakers, fluent speakers, and probably some learners, depending on importance, with inconsistent direction. Bad translation never makes it illegible, it's just disappointing and feels like a letdown. Like, everyone is trying so hard to make this a good game. Why botch the translation? Also, the game has been out for months. Where are the patches to fix the translation issues and missing lines? Design-wise, Xuan Yuan 7 is very intriguing to me because it's something I rarely see in the RPG genre. I'm sure there are plenty of examples out there, and feel free to let me know what those are in the comments below and I'll go check them out. The visuals are interesting to me because I grew up with mystical sword and sorcery shows from Hong Kong, and it's nice to see something that's not using an aesthetic that we usually get from this genre. But whilst I really like the overall themes of the visual design, it can get lazy on the technical side. What I mean is that main characters have very nice textures on their clothing and their faces. I didn't expect to see a Lengloi in this game, but one of the characters is a proper one. The faces do lack expression though, and the further away we get from the main characters, the worse their faces and clothes look in general. And it's clearly noticeable that there are only about 10 stock NPC faces in the game. Seriously guys, they all look the same. If you don't look too closely, environments seem decent, but textures can be poor and sometimes the oddities get in your face, like this grey ooze climbing up the wall, and unfortunately there isn't much variety in the outer locations. It's usually forest and more forest, and most towns don't have their own identity. I do really like that upgrading weapons changes the weapon model, and I'm always excited to see what the next upgrade looks like. However, new clothing and trinkets don't change their looks, only stats. Unfortunately, the only way to change the look of the character clothing is through skins, which has become more and more common in this genre, for example with the Tales games. And I'm not at all a fan of this limitation. It takes a lot of the excitement out of acquiring new gear for me. I'm going to end on a high note here and say that I really love that you can see all your party members on screen as you explore, as it does go a long way to helping me feel like I'm actually going on an adventure with a group of misfits. Again, owing to the ancient China theme, it's great to hear the Eastern instruments represented, with an occasional fusion of modern touches during boss fights to ramp up the excitement. Voice acting is great, and it's so good that I can tell the actors are doing a great job even though I don't understand what they're saying. Lines are performed and delivered whilst carrying the correct emotions with it. When the main character is teasing his sister, I can hear it. When he's consoling her, I can hear it. When she's annoyed at his antics, this is delivered clearly by an audible exasperation without the need for excessive ums and ahs. Which is all very important because there is no option for English spoken dialogue, and the face modelling displays hardly any emotions, so the vocal performances have to carry a lot of the weight. But just like the graphics, it's the quality that can sometimes be a letdown. It's mostly good, but when it's bad it really stands out. There's a clip of a crying baby that sounds like it was recorded on a phone, and there was no audio engineer around to tweak it, so it doesn't even come off like it's from the same game.
行了，别哭，俺兄在，还有二兄在。乖，别怕，俺兄保护你。
The game is also weak at recreating a crowd that are all visually cheering, but audibly it sounds like 3 people on a loop. In general, the game is lacking impactful sound effects, which made the world feel a little bit empty, and like the characters aren't really interacting with the environment. Sounds for scraping along a wall or hearing the roar of the distant waterfall could have gone a long way. Listen to this pitiful ancient door. Playing this game brings up good memories from my youth of old Chinese TV shows. It's even got some classic TV show things like breaking out into a song. Anyone who's watched movies based in ancient China will recognise the medicine balls that look like Maltesers. Now, I've said a lot of negative stuff about this game, but I liked it. I really enjoyed spending time with the main party of characters and diving into what seems like a rich lore. The devs clearly loved their franchise and tried their best to make a good game. It's sad that their budget couldn't stretch far enough for them to truly realise their vision. I hope we see more of the Xuan Yuan Sword series in the West, because I love that it exists and would definitely pick up a sequel or remake of the older titles. If you're curious about Xuan Yuan 7, you can't really go wrong if you buy it on sale. I managed to pick this up for £22, about $25 for our American friends, and I felt like I got my money's worth. So that's my advice. If you like RPGs, get it on sale and discover something a little bit different. If you need a score to type this review, let's call it a 6.5. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. If you liked the video and want to see me make more reviews like this, hit the like and subscribe buttons. As always, they don't cost you a penny, but would help out the channel a lot. See you on the next one.